I received a handwritten note on the morning of my wife's funeral that changed everything. It read simply, "Do not go to the cemetery. Go to your brother's house instead. You will see the truth there." I stood in my hallway dressed in black while my family waited in the limousines outside. I made a choice that morning that would burn my entire life to the ground. When I arrived at my brother's house, I did not find grief. I found a celebration. But before I tell you how I destroyed them with a single signature, let me know in the comments if you have ever trusted someone who stabbed you in the back. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that karma is a dish best served cold. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master bedroom of my Connecticut estate. The black silk tie felt like a noose around my neck. My wife Patricia had died 3 days ago in a tragic boating accident on the lake. The police said the current was too strong. They never found her body. We were burying an empty casket today. I looked at my reflection. At 68 years old, I looked tired. My skin was gray, my eyes hollow. I was the picture of a grieving widower, a retired architect with $25 million in the bank and no one to share it with. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed to put on my shoes. They were Italian leather Oxfords, the same ones I had worn to our wedding 10 years ago. As I slid my right foot inside, I felt something hard against my heel. I frowned and pulled the shoe off. I reached inside and pulled out a piece of paper crumpled into a tight, angry ball. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was a page torn from a yellow legal pad. The handwriting was hurried, jagged, as if written in panic. It said, "Richard, do not go to the cemetery. It is a puppet show. She is not in the casket. Go to your brother Gary's house. Go through the back door. You will see the face of the devil there." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Gary. My older brother Gary had been jealous of me since high school. He was a gambler, a drinker, a man who had borrowed $50,000 from me just last month to pay off a shark. Why would the note point to him? And who put this in my shoe? There was a soft knock at the bedroom door. It was the funeral director, a somber man in a cheap suit. "Mr. Caldwell," he said softly, "the limousine is waiting. Your son Tyler and his wife are already in the lead car. We need to leave now to stay on schedule." I looked at the crumpled note in my hand, then at the funeral director. A cold feeling washed over me. It was not grief. It was instinct. The same instinct that had made me a fortune in real estate. Something was wrong. The air in the house felt heavy, suffocating, full of lies. I shoved the note into my pocket and grabbed my car keys from the dresser. "Go ahead without me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The director blinked, confused. "But sir, the procession. You are the husband. You must be in the lead car." I walked past him, heading not for the front door, but for the side exit, where I kept my vintage Jaguar. I turned back to him with a look that dared him to argue. I said, "I forgot my heart medication. I cannot go without it. I will drive myself and meet you at the gravesite. Go. Now." I did not wait for his answer. I marched out into the humid morning air. I watched the long line of black town cars pull away down the driveway. My son Tyler was in the back seat of the first one, probably practicing his sad face for the cameras. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I drove to the end of the street. To the left was the highway leading to the cemetery, where hundreds of people were waiting to mourn a woman who might not even be dead. To the right was the winding road up to the ridge where my brother Gary lived, in a house I had paid for. I turned right. I drove fast, the engine roaring, leaving the funeral procession behind. I did not know it yet, but I was driving toward my own execution, or perhaps my rebirth. The drive to my brother Gary's house felt like an eternity, though it was only 5 miles from my estate. I bought this house for him 3 years ago when he claimed he was bankrupt after a failed investment scheme. It sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, a sprawling modern structure of glass and steel that cost me $2 million. I remember signing the check, thinking I was saving my family. As I pulled my Jaguar to a stop a block away, keeping it hidden behind a cluster of oak trees, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The street was empty. It should have been. Everyone was supposed to be at the cemetery, mourning my wife. I approached the house on foot, limping slightly. My arthritis was flaring up in the damp morning air, a sharp needle of pain in my right knee with every step. I expected silence. I expected a dark house, perhaps, with Gary inside, getting ready to join the funeral procession late. Instead, as I got closer to the tall iron front gate, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was music. Smooth, upbeat jazz drifting from inside. Not funeral dirges. Not silence. It sounded like a cocktail party. The front gate was locked, and the security keypad code I knew had evidently been changed. I moved around to the side where a 6-foot wooden privacy fence separated the yard from the woods. I looked at the height. 10 years ago, I would have vaulted over it without a second thought. Today at 68, with 2 bad knees and a heart that felt like it was breaking, it looked like a fortress wall. But the rage burning in my gut gave me a surge of adrenaline I did not know I possessed. I threw my black suit jacket over the top planks to protect my hands from splinters. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the screaming protest of my joints, and hauled myself up. I tumbled onto the damp grass on the other side, landing hard on my shoulder. Mud stained the knees of my Italian dress trousers. I did not care. I lay there for a moment, staring at the gray sky, breathing heavily. Sweat trickled down my back under the starch of my white dress shirt. I felt ridiculous, a wealthy old man crawling through the dirt like a common thief. But the music was louder here. I rolled over and stayed low, crawling behind the manicured hedges I had paid a landscaper to install just last month. I felt like a criminal in a house I technically owned. I reached the back patio. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows were covered by heavy velvet drapes, but there was a gap. Just a sliver of space where the curtains did not quite meet. A beam of warm golden light spilled out onto the cold stone patio. I pressed my back against the brick wall, took a deep breath to steady my shaking hands, and leaned forward. I put one eye to the glass. The scene inside was so clear, so vivid, that for a second my brain refused to process it. I blinked, sure that the stress and grief had caused me to hallucinate. But when I looked again, the nightmare remained. I saw the living room furniture I had purchased. I saw the expensive rug. And then I saw the people who were supposed to be crying over a grave. I blinked once, twice, 3 times, praying that my mind was playing tricks on me due to grief and exhaustion. But the image did not dissolve into a nightmare. It solidified into a reality that was sharper and colder than the knife twisting in my gut. Patricia was not at the bottom of the lake. She was not bloated or pale or lifeless. She was sitting on the plush leather armchair I had paid for, straddling my brother Gary's lap. She was alive, vibrant, and worst of all, she was laughing. She was wearing a dress I recognized instantly. It was a scandalous, bright red silk cocktail dress she had bought in Paris last year on my credit card. She had told me back then that it was too tight to wear, yet here she was wearing it to celebrate her own funeral. The contrast between her crimson dress and the somber black suit I was wearing while kneeling in the mud outside was a slap in the face. I pressed my ear against the cold glass, desperate to hear what they were saying. The heavy pain muffled their voices, but I could hear them clearly enough. Gary was holding a crystal flute filled with golden liquid. I narrowed my eyes and saw the bottle on the coffee table. My stomach dropped. It was a bottle of Dom Perignon 1996, taken from my private wine cellar. I had been saving that specific bottle for our 10th wedding anniversary next month. Now my brother and my wife were drinking it to toast my misery. Gary raised the glass high, the expensive alcohol sloshing over the rim. He said loud enough for the sound to vibrate through the window, "Here is to the old fool standing in the rain at the cemetery right now. May his tears water the grass over that empty box." Patricia threw her head back and let out a cackle that sounded like breaking glass. She clinked her glass against his. To Richard she purred, her voice dripping with venom. The most gullible man in Connecticut. Thank God I never have to sleep in the same bed with his wrinkled skin again. I am finally free, Gary. We are finally rich. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt a sharp pain radiate from my left arm to my chest. My heart condition. I fumbled in my pocket for my pills, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the bottle. I dry swallowed a tablet, forcing myself to breathe. Do not die yet, Richard, I told myself. You cannot die while they are laughing. Inside the room, the mood shifted from celebratory to lustful. I watched, paralyzed by horror, as Gary set his glass down and grabbed Patricia by the waist. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. She tangled her fingers in his thinning hair, the diamond ring I gave her catching the light of the chandelier. They kissed. It was not a tentative kiss. It was hungry, familiar, and possessive. It was the kiss of two people who had been lovers for a very long time. I realized then that this was not a sudden fling. The way their bodies moved together, the way she knew exactly how to touch him, it spoke of years of betrayal. Every time she went to the spa, every time she visited her sick mother, she had been here, in this house, with my brother. I had paid for the roof over their heads while they plotted to put me 6 feet under. I wanted to smash the window. I wanted to storm in there and strangle them both with my bare hands. But as I raised my fist, I saw movement in the hallway behind them. I froze. The door opened and more people walked in. I lowered my hand, my rage turning into ice-cold calculation. The cast of this grotesque play was growing, and I needed to see every single player before I made my move. The heavy oak doors swung open, and 2 more figures walked into this party of the damned. It was my son Tyler and his wife Brittany. If seeing my dead wife alive was a shock, seeing my son was the heartbreak that almost killed me. I expected them to be at the cemetery, perhaps weeping over the empty grave to keep up appearances. Instead, they walked in looking like they were heading to a country club brunch. Tyler was wearing a bright blue polo shirt and khaki short sunglasses perched on his head. Brittany was wearing a yellow sundress that screamed of summer joy, not mourning. There was not a shred of black clothing on either of them. I watched through this gap in the curtains as Tyler walked straight to the coffee table and tossed a heavy ring of keys onto the glass surface. The metal clattered loudly, cutting through the jazz music. He let out a sigh of relief, grabbed a bottle of beer from an ice bucket, and took a long swig. He wiped his mouth and looked at Gary and Patricia with a grin that made my blood boil. "It is done," Tyler announced, his voice booming with arrogance. "I just came from the mansion. The locksmith finished 10 minutes ago. Every single lock on the main house has been changed. When the old man comes back from the funeral, his key will not fit a single door." Brittany giggled, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. She walked over to the bar and began pouring herself a drink. "But where is he going to sleep, Tyler?" she asked, though her tone suggested she did not care in the slightest. "We cannot have him banging on the door all night while we are trying to celebrate." Tyler laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Do not worry, babe. I moved his things. Well, I moved the things he actually needs. A few clothes and his heart pills. I put them in the gardener's shed out back. It has a cot and a working toilet. That is more than enough for a man who is losing his mind. He can rot in there until we put him in a state facility." My hand shook violently as I held my phone up, the red recording light blinking steadily. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. This was the boy I had raised. This was the boy I had sat up with when he had fevers, the boy whose college tuition I had paid in full, the boy I had bought a Porsche for when he graduated. I had given him everything, and his plan for my golden years was to lock me out of the home I built and force me to sleep in a tool shed like a stray dog. Gary, who was still stroking Patricia's hair, raised his glass again. To the shed, he mocked, and to the new masters of the Caldwell estate. I zoomed in on their faces. I needed every pixel of their smiles. I needed clear audio of their cruelty. The pain in my chest was no longer a heart attack waiting to happen. It was fuel. It was a cold, hard reactor core starting to spin. I was not going to pound on the glass. I was not going to scream. I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to let Tyler think he had locked me out. He did not realize that by changing those locks, he had just sealed his own fate inside a prison of his own making. I lowered the phone, saved the video, and prepared to play the role of a lifetime. I pressed my ear closer to the cold glass, desperate to catch every syllable of their treason. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the sound slightly, but their arrogance made them loud. Patricia was speaking now, swirling the champagne in her glass. She looked at Gary with eyes that shone with greed, not love. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "the timing of that boating accident was absolute genius. The syndicate in Las Vegas gave me exactly 2 weeks to come up with $500,000, or they were going to break my legs. Now not only are my debts wiped clean, but the life insurance policy pays out $4 million for accidental death." I felt the bile rise in my throat. My wife had not died. She had staged her own death to pay off gambling debts I did not even know existed. She had put me through the hell of identifying a piece of driftwood as a part of her boat just to save her own skin. But it was Gary's next words that made my blood freeze in my veins. He laughed a low, guttural sound and pulled a small orange prescription bottle from his pocket. He shook it, the rattling sound echoing like a rattlesnake warning. "The $4 million is just the appetizer, my love," Gary said, placing the bottle on the table. "The main course is Richard's $25 million estate, and this is how we get it. I already swapped his heart medication for these. High-dose antipsychotics and memory suppressants." Tyler leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Will it work?" he asked. Gary nodded. "Within a week he will be forgetting names. Within a month he will be hallucinating. We will have him declared mentally incompetent by Christmas. As his legal guardians, we will control every penny. We will put him in the cheapest state facility we can find, and we will move into the mansion before the ink is dry on the court order." My knees nearly gave out. They were not just stealing from me. They were planning to erase me. They were going to destroy my mind, strip away my dignity, and lock me away in a padded room while they spent the fortune I had worked 40 years to build. The sheer evil of it was suffocating. I was standing outside the home I paid for, listening to my murder being planned by the people I loved most. I needed to get out. I needed to get to the police. I took a step back, my vision blurring with rage and terror. But in my haste, I forgot where I was. My heel came down hard on a dry, thick branch hidden in the grass. Crack! The sound was sharp and loud like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. Inside the room, the laughter died instantly. The silence was absolute. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw Gary's head snap toward the window. His eyes narrowed. He set his glass down slowly and began walking straight toward the glass, his face twisted in suspicion. I threw myself flat onto the damp earth behind the thick wall of rhododendrons, just as the glass door slid open. The mud seeped into my expensive suit, cold and unforgiving, but I did not dare to breathe. I pressed my face into the dirt, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard heavy footsteps on the patio stones just inches from where I lay hidden. Gary's voice drifted out, sounding annoyed rather than alarmed. He said, "Probably just a raccoon. The woods are full of them." I heard the clink of glass, likely him finishing his drink, and then the sound of the door sliding shut and the lock clicking into place. I waited a full 2 minutes, counting every second in my head, before I dared to move. My knees screamed in protest as I crawled backward through the mud, dragging my 68-year-old body away from the house of betrayal. I made it back to my Jaguar without being seen. My hands were shaking so violently that it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. But as the engine roared to life, the shaking stopped. A strange, icy calm washed over me. The grief I had felt this morning was gone, replaced by a cold mathematical rage. I was an architect. I knew how to build structures that lasted for centuries, and I knew exactly where to place the dynamite to bring them down in seconds. I did not drive home. I drove straight to the glass tower in downtown Hartford, where my personal attorney Harper Cole had his office. It was a Saturday, but Harper was a workaholic who billed $600 an hour. I knew he would be there. I breezed past the security guard who tried to stop me because of my muddy clothes and wild appearance. I took the elevator to the penthouse suite and kicked open the double mahogany doors. Harper looked up from his desk, startled. "Richard," he said, standing up. "My God, you are supposed to be at the funeral. What happened to you? Why are you covered in mud?" I did not say a word. I walked over to his desk, pulled my phone from my pocket, and threw it onto the polished wood surface. It slid across the desk and stopped right in front of him. I said, "Watch it. Watch every second of it. And then tell me how we destroy them." Harper picked up the phone. I watched his face as the video played. His eyes went wide. His jaw tightened. He watched the kiss. He listened to the plan about the antipsychotic drugs. He heard my son laugh about locking me in the shed. When the video ended, Harper set the phone down gently, as if it were a loaded gun. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and professional fury. He said, "Richard, we need to call the police immediately. This is conspiracy to commit murder. This is fraud." I shook my head slowly. "No police," I said, my voice low and steady. "Not yet. If we arrest them now, they get a lawyer. They fight it. Maybe they get a plea deal. I do not want them in a cell yet, Harper. I want them to think they have won. I want them to spend money they do not have. I want to watch the hope drain from their eyes when the trap snaps shut." Harper leaned back, understanding dawning in his eyes. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him, ignoring the mud I was smearing on the expensive upholstery. I said, "Draft a revocation of all power of attorney documents. Create a shadow trust that moves my liquid assets out of their reach, but makes it look like the accounts are still active. And hire a forensic accountant. I want to know every penny my wife stole before she decided to die. I am going back to that house, Harper. I am going to play the senile old man they want me to be. And while they are celebrating my decline, I am going to bury them." I pulled my Jaguar into the long, winding driveway of the estate I had designed and built 30 years ago. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the brick facade, making the house look less like a home and more like a mausoleum. My hands were steady on the wheel now. The trembling had stopped the moment I left Harper's office. I was no longer a grieving husband. I was an undercover agent in my own life, returning to the scene of a crime that was still in progress. I walked up the stone steps to the massive oak front double doors. Out of habit, I reached into my pocket for my keys, the brass ones that had hung on my ring for decades. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. It stopped halfway. It did not budge. I tried again, jiggling it, knowing full well it would never open. Tyler had been efficient. The locks were indeed changed. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of confusion and frailty, and rang the doorbell. It took less than 10 seconds for the door to swing open. Tyler stood there. Gone was the blue polo shirt and the arrogant grin I had seen through the window at Gary's house. He was now wearing a somber black suit, his tie loosened just enough to suggest exhaustion. His eyes were red, likely from rubbing them rather than crying. "Dad," he exclaimed, his voice thick with fake concern. "Where have you been? We were so worried. We waited at the cemetery for an hour. The service. We had to start without you." I looked at him, fighting the urge to smash my fist into his lying jaw. Instead, I let my shoulders slump forward. I made my hands shake as I reached out to touch his arm. "I am sorry, son," I whispered, my voice trembling. I I got confused. I was driving to the cemetery, and then suddenly I did not know where I was. I ended up on the old highway. I think something is wrong with my head. Tyler's eyes lit up. It was a subtle shift, a microscopic widening of the pupils, but I saw it. It was the look of a predator realizing the prey is already wounded. He exchanged a quick glance with Brittany, who had appeared behind him in the foyer. She too had changed into a modest black dress, clutching a handkerchief. "Oh, Dad," Brittany cooed, stepping forward to take my other arm. "You are just overwhelmed with grief. Come inside. Come sit down." They led me into the living room like I was an invalid. The house smelled of lilies, too many of them, a suffocating scent of death. They sat me down on the sofa, the very sofa Tyler had claimed would be his in a month. Tyler pulled a tissue from a box and pressed it into my hand. "Mom is at peace now." "Dad," he said, crouching down in front of me so he was eye level. "It was a beautiful service, even if you missed it. She would want you to rest now. You look exhausted. Your face is so pale." I took the tissue and dabbed at my dry eyes, forcing a sob to rack my chest. I buried my face in my hands to hide my expression, which was not sorrow, but pure, unadulterated hatred. "I do not know what is happening to me, Tyler," I mumbled into my palms. "My thoughts, they are like soup. Everything is spinning." I tried to remember the way home and I panicked. Brittany placed a cold hand on my shoulder. "Do not worry, Richard," she said soothingly. "We are here now. We are going to take care of everything. You do not have to worry about bills or the house or anything. Just rest." I peeked through my fingers and saw Tyler smirk at her. They thought the deterioration had already started naturally. They thought I was already losing my mind. This would make them bold. This would make them careless with the drugs they planned to slip me tonight. "I am just so tired," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes. "I feel like I could sleep for a week." "Excellent," Tyler said, standing up and dusting off his knees. "You rest here, Dad. Brittany is going to make you some warm milk. It will help you sleep. We have a special recipe that always works." I kept my eyes closed, listening to their footsteps retreat into the kitchen. The game had begun. They were going to bring me poison, and I was going to thank them for it. The sun had set hours ago, plunging the estate into a darkness that felt heavier than usual. I was sitting in the corner of the library, wrapped in a blanket Tyler had thrown over me as if I were a freezing child. They had insisted I stay downstairs tonight. They claimed the stairs were too dangerous for my dizzy spells, but I knew the truth. They wanted me on the ground floor so they could keep an eye on me, and so I would be closer to the back door when they eventually kicked me out to the shed. The heavy mahogany door creaked open, slicing a beam of hallway light across the Persian rug. Brittany entered. She was walking softly, balancing a silver tray on her hip. On the tray sat a single ceramic mug, steam rising from it in delicate swirling ribbons. The smell hit me before she even reached the chair. It was warm milk laced with honey and cinnamon, a scent that should have been comforting. But underneath the sweetness, my nose detected something else. A faint metallic tang, a chemical sharpness that did not belong in a kitchen. "Here you go, Dad," Brittany said, her voice dropping to that sickly sweet register she used when she wanted my credit card. "I made this myself. It is warm milk with a little turmeric. It does wonders for anxiety. It will help you sleep through the night without any bad dreams." I looked up at her, forcing my eyes to look glassy and unfocused. I let my jaw hang slightly loose. "You are an angel." "Brittany," I stammered, making my hand tremble violently as I reached for the mug. "I do not know what I would do without you and Tyler. Everyone else left me." She smiled, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. She watched my hand closely, making sure I gripped the handle. "Drink it while it is hot, Richard," she urged. "Every last drop. You need your strength for tomorrow." I lifted the mug to my lips. The steam warmed my face. I could feel her gaze burning into me, waiting for the poison to enter my system. I tipped the cup, letting the liquid touch my lips, but I kept my teeth clenched tight. I made a loud gulping sound in my throat, a trick I had learned from dodging horrible cough syrup as a child. I lowered the mug, wiping a drop of milk from my lip with a shaky finger. "It is delicious," I whispered, letting my head loll back against the leather headrest. "I feel sleepy already." "Good," she said, satisfied. She reached out and patted my cheek, her touch feeling like the brush of a spider web. "I will leave you to rest. Do not try to get up. We locked the front door for your safety." She turned and walked out, closing the library door with a definitive click. I counted to 10. 1, 2, 3. As soon as I reached 10, the trembling in my hands vanished. The confused old man disappeared. I sat up straight, my senses sharp and alert. I moved silent as a ghost across the room to the large potted ficus tree near the window. I whispered an apology to the plant, knowing what I was about to do would likely kill it. I poured the contents of the mug into the soil, watching the white liquid seep into the dark earth. But I did not empty it completely. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small empty plastic vial I used for travel shampoo. With the precision of a surgeon, I poured the remaining dregs of the milk into the vial and screwed the cap on tight. This was not just milk. This was evidence. This was the weapon they were using to murder my mind, and now it was the weapon I would use to secure their prison sentences. I hid the vial deep in the inside pocket of my jacket. I returned the empty mug to the tray and slumped back into the chair, closing my eyes. The biological warfare had begun. They thought I was drifting into a chemical fog. They had no idea I was wide awake and I was watching every move they made. The next morning, I put on the performance of a lifetime. I shuffled into the kitchen wearing my bathrobe inside out, letting my hands tremble as I reached for the coffee pot. Tyler and Brittany were already there, dressed in designer clothes that I had paid for. They exchanged a look of pure triumph when they saw my disheveled state. To them, the drugs were working faster than expected. Tyler told me they were going to meet with the estate lawyer to handle some paperwork for me since I was clearly in no condition to drive. I nodded vaguely, spilling a little coffee on the counter to sell the act. As soon as I heard the heavy front door slam and the sound of my Mercedes pulling out of the driveway, I dropped the trembling hand routine instantly. I moved with the speed and precision of a man half my age. I had a window of 3 hours, and I had 2 critical tasks to complete. First, I called a private courier service I had used for confidential blueprints for decades. Within 20 minutes, a biker in a black helmet was at my service entrance. I handed him the plastic vial containing the dregs of the milk. It was addressed to Dr. Evans, a toxicologist at the university hospital, who owed me a favor for designing his vacation home at cost. I taped a $100 bill to the vial with a note that said, "Rush analysis. Life or death." Next, I unlocked the side door for the security team Harper had hired. They were not the local alarm company. These were former intelligence specialists who charged a fortune and asked 0 questions. Because I was the architect of this house, I knew every hollow space behind the walls. I directed them to install pinhole cameras in the eyes of the oil portraits in the living room, inside the smoke detectors in the master bedroom, and behind the vent in the kitchen. By the time Tyler and Brittany returned at noon, the technicians were gone. The drywall dust was cleaned up, and the house was the most sophisticated surveillance trap in Connecticut. I was back on the sofa, staring blankly at the television, looking for all the world like a man whose mind was dissolving. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a single encrypted email from Dr. Evans. I waited until I was alone in the bathroom to check it. The subject line was simply "Red Alert." I opened the attachment. The chemical breakdown was complex, but the summary at the bottom was chillingly clear. The milk contained a calculated dose of arsenic trioxide. It was not enough to kill me instantly. That would look suspicious. It was a maintenance dose designed to cause confusion, memory loss, and eventual heart failure over a period of weeks. They were not just trying to steal my money, they were torturing me to death. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale not from the poison, but from the realization of how close I had come to drinking that mug. I walked back out to the living room and looked at the ficus tree where I had poured the milk the night before. The leaves were already turning yellow and curling at the edges. That wilting plant was my ghost. It was what I would have become if I had trusted the people who called me family. I sat back down on the sofa feeling a cold, dark resolve settle in my chest. If they wanted to play with poison, I would make sure they choked on it. I locked the door of the downstairs guest bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub. My hands were steady as I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the app connected to the hidden cameras I had installed just hours ago. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy but clear black and white view of my private study upstairs. This was my sanctuary, a room filled with first editions and the architectural blueprints of the skyscrapers I had built. Now it was a crime scene. On the small screen, I watched my son Tyler tear through the room like a wild animal. He was not looking for sentimental keepsakes. He was hunting. He pulled books from the shelves and threw them onto the floor, ripping the pages out in his frenzy. He overturned my mahogany desk drawers, dumping 30 years of correspondence onto the Persian rug. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, sweaty desperation that I had never seen before. Through the microphone hidden in the smoke detector, his voice came through tinny but distinct. "Where is it?" he hissed, kicking a pile of my journals. "Where did the old bastard write down the combination?" He moved to the large portrait of my grandfather on the wall behind which sat the wall safe. He punched a code into the keypad. The safe beeped twice, signaling an error. He punched it again, harder this time. Error. "Damn it!" Tyler screamed, striking the wall with his fist. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and dialed a number. I turned the volume up on my phone. He began pacing in circles amidst the wreckage of my office. "Rocco." "Please listen to me," Tyler pleaded into the phone. His voice was trembling. "I need 24 hours. Just 24 hours. The old man is already losing it. We are drugging him. I will have access to the accounts by Friday. Do not send your guys to the house. Please. I have a wife here." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. His face went pale, draining of all color. "I understand," he whispered. 50,000 by midnight tomorrow, or I lose a hand. I get it. I will get it. I swear on my mother's grave." He hung up and threw his phone onto my desk. I sat there in the bathroom staring at the image of my terrified son. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked together. Tyler was not just a greedy son waiting for an inheritance. He was a desperate gambler who had gotten in bed with loan sharks. That was why they were rushing. That was why they used arsenic instead of waiting for nature to take its course. They did not have months. They had hours. A cold smile touched my lips. Desperation makes men sloppy. Desperation makes them take risks they should not take. Tyler was drowning, and he needed a lifeline. I was not going to give him a lifeline. I was going to throw him an anchor. I knew exactly where the safe combination was. It was in my head, the only place he could not reach. But now I knew that money was his immediate trigger. If I dangled the promise of cash in front of him, he would dance to whatever tune I played. I stood up and flushed the toilet to cover the sound of my movement. I had a new plan. I was going to use his debt to turn him against his accomplices. I sat at the marble kitchen island, sipping a cup of herbal tea that I had made myself to ensure it was free of poison. On the counter in front of me, my secure tablet hummed with a silent notification. I glanced down at the screen. It was an alert from American Express. The message was simple and satisfying. Transaction declined. $21,500 at Rolex Jewelers on Main Street. Reason for decline. Card reported lost or stolen by primary account holder. I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. Tyler was not wasting any time. He was trying to turn my credit limit into liquid cash to pay off the sharks before his deadline expired at midnight. He was likely standing at the counter right now, sweating in his designer suit, with a sales clerk looking at him with pity and suspicion. 3 seconds later, my cell phone rang. The caller ID flashed Tyler. I took a deep breath, let my shoulders slump, and answered with a voice that sounded thin and confused. "Hello," I answered, letting a slight tremor enter my words. "Is that you?" "Tyler, Dad?" Tyler shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Why is the black card declined?" "I am at the store. It is embarrassing. You have a limit of $500,000. Why is it not going through?" I held the phone away from my ear, feigning sensitivity to the noise. I blinked slowly at the empty kitchen. "Oh dear," I said slowly. "The card, which card is that, son? The blue one or the one with the picture of the dog on it?" "The American Express, Richard." "The black metal one," Tyler screamed. "Did you forget to pay the bill?" "Tell me you did not forget to pay the bill." I let a long, painful silence hang in the air. I could hear Tyler breathing heavily on the other end. I could practically hear his heart hammering against his ribs as he imagined Rocco and his men coming for his kneecaps. I do not know," I stammered finally. "I think I saw a bill last week. Or was it last month?" "My head is so cloudy today, Tyler. I think I might have thrown it in the trash by mistake. I thought it was junk mail." There was a sound of pure frustration on the other line, something like a growl mixed with a sob. "Fix it, Dad," Tyler hissed. "You have to call the bank right now. Authorize the charge. I need this. I need this watch. It is for a memorial. For Mom." I leaned back in my chair, taking another sip of tea. "I am sorry, son," I said, playing the part of the helpless old man to perfection. "I cannot call them. I do not know the security password. You know I forget things. I think I wrote it down in a notebook somewhere in the attic. Or maybe it was in the basement. I will look for it tomorrow, when I feel stronger." "Tomorrow," Tyler shrieked. "No, I need it now." I hung up the phone, gently cutting off his desperation mid-sentence. I placed the device face down on the counter. The bait had been taken. I had cut off his easy access to funds. Now he had no choice. He could not pawn a watch he could not buy. His only option left was the wall safe in my office. He would come home in a rage, terrified and reckless. And when he did, I would be waiting to guide him exactly where I wanted him to go. The loan sharks were not the only ones closing in on him. I was tightening the noose, and I had not even left my kitchen stool. I sat on the rusty army cot in the gardener's shed, the smell of fertilizer and old gasoline stinging my nose. This was where my son believed I belonged. The humiliation was physical, a heavy weight on my chest, but it was also clarifying. Stripped of my comfort, I was no longer the distracted patriarch. I was a survivor. My eyes scanned the wooden floorboards near the lawnmower. One plank looked slightly uneven, the nail heads scratched as if they had been pried up recently. I remembered that 20 years ago, this shed had been Patricia's hiding spot. She used to come out here to smoke secret cigarettes when she was supposedly quitting. I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees, and worked the loose board free. Beneath it, nestled in the insulation, was a dusty shoebox. It was not filled with cigarettes. It was filled with memories she had not bothered to destroy. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, the leather cracked with age. My hands were steady as I opened it. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was the same jagged, hurried script that had been on the note in my shoe yesterday. But these entries were from 30 years ago. I turned to a page dated October 14th, 1995. It was 1 week before our wedding day. I remembered that week. I had sent her 24 roses and a diamond bracelet. I thought she was nervous with pre-wedding jitters. I read the words she had written in blue ink. "I cannot do this," she wrote. I look at Richard and I feel nothing but pity. He is so boring, so safe. He talks about architecture and the future, and I just want to scream. I do not love him. I never have. I felt a cold hollowness spread through my stomach, but I kept reading. The next paragraph was the dagger. But I have no choice. Gary got 5 years in state prison yesterday. He has no money. He has no future. If I wait for him, I will be waiting in a trailer park. Richard is the golden goose. He is my ticket out of poverty. I will marry the bank account. I will be a good little wife, and I will wait for the lover to come home. When Gary gets out, we will figure out how to spend Richard's money together. I closed the book. For 30 years I had believed our marriage was real. I believed the "I love you" whispers in the dark were genuine. I believed she was just high maintenance, perhaps a bit materialistic, but that she loved me. It was all a lie. I was not a husband. I was a placeholder. I was an ATM machine with a pulse keeping the seat warm until my criminal brother could reclaim his prize. The anger that rose in me was not hot. It was absolute zero. It froze the last remaining drops of affection I had for her. I was about to put the book back when a folded piece of paper slipped out from the back cover. I unfolded it. It was a medical document from a clinic in Boston dated 9 months after the wedding. It was about the birth of my son Tyler, or rather, the boy I had called my son. I read the doctor's handwritten notes in the margin, and the world stopped turning. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was genetic. The folded document felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the leather journal itself. It was a medical report from a genetics laboratory in Boston, dated 28 years ago. The edges were yellowed, but the typewritten text was brutally clear. It was a paternity test result. I forced my eyes to focus on the bottom line, the only line that mattered. Probability of paternity for Richard Caldwell. 0.0%. I stopped breathing. The air in the shed seemed to vanish. I read the next line. Conclusion. The biological father is Gary Caldwell. I dropped the paper onto the dusty floorboards as if it were burning my skin. The world tilted on its axis. Tyler. The boy I had held in the delivery room while Patricia screamed. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The boy I had taught to drive, whose college tuition I had paid, whose debts I was currently worrying about. He was not my son. He never was. He was the product of a secret twisted union between my wife and my brother, while I was busy working 18-hour days to build them a fortune. I remembered the night Tyler had appendicitis when he was 10. I slept in a plastic chair next to his hospital bed for 3 days, refusing to leave his side. I remembered Gary coming to visit for 10 minutes, making a joke about hospital food, and leaving to go to the racetrack. I had thought Gary was just a bad uncle. Now I realized he was a monster, who watched his own brother raise his child, laughing at my ignorance every single day for 3 decades. A sound escaped my throat, a low guttural moan that sounded like a wounded animal. My first instinct was violence. I looked at the rusty shovel in the corner of the shed. I imagined walking back into the main house, walking past the security cameras, and ending this charade with blunt force. My hands clenched into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I wanted to see fear in their eyes. I wanted to see them bleed the way my heart was bleeding. But then the architect in me took over. Violence is messy. Violence is emotional. And violence would send me to prison while they spent my money. No. That was too easy for them. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. When I opened them, the tears were gone. The father in me had died in that shed. The man who stood up was cold, hollow, and terrifyingly rational. I picked up the document and took a high-resolution photo of it with my phone. Then I carefully folded the paper and placed it back inside the journal. I put the journal back in the shoebox and slid it under the floorboard, hammering the nail back down with the heel of my shoe. I would not confront them with this yet. I needed them to believe I was still the loving senile father. I needed Tyler to believe he was still my heir. Because if he knew that I knew, he might kill me tonight. I walked to the door of the shed and looked at the main house. The lights were on in the living room. They were in there, eating my food, drinking my wine, living on my lies. I whispered to the darkness, "Enjoy your dinner, Tyler. It is the last free meal you will ever get. I am not going to kill you. I am going to make you wish you had never been born." The sun was barely up when Tyler stormed into the library where I had spent the night, pretending to sleep in the armchair. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale and clammy, and he smelled of stale coffee and fear. He was a man running out of time. The loan sharks had given him until midnight, and it was already 8 in the morning. He needed access to my millions, and he needed it now. He slapped a thick stack of legal documents onto the coffee table in front of me. The sound made me jump, a genuine reaction to his aggression, though I quickly masked it with a look of confused frailty. "Dad," Tyler said, his voice tight and breathless. "We need to talk. Brittany and I stayed up all night worrying about you. The arsenic milk, the confusion, the memory loss. It is clear that you are suffering from severe depression and early onset dementia. We cannot take care of you here. It is too dangerous." I looked at him, blinking slowly. I saw the desperation in his eyes. He was not worried about my health. He was worried about his kneecaps. "What is this?" I asked, pointing a shaking finger at the papers. "It is a power of attorney, Dad," he lied, uncapping a fountain pen and shoving it into my hand. "It authorizes me to sell this house immediately so we can get the cash to pay for a private treatment center in Switzerland. It is the best in the world. They can fix you. But we need a deposit today, a big one." I looked down at the document. It was a standard real estate power of attorney granting him full rights to liquidate my assets. If I signed this, he could sell my home, empty my bank accounts, and leave me destitute within 24 hours. He watched me with the intensity of a starving wolf, his leg bouncing nervously. "I understand," I whispered, my voice cracking. You want to send me away, Dad?" "We want to save you," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just sign the bottom line. Right there next to the X. Do it for Mom. Do it so you can get better." I gripped the pen. I let my hand tremble violently, the tip of the pen tapping against the paper. I looked at the signature line. In my mind, I was perfectly calm. I remembered my years working with forensic document examiners. A signature is like a fingerprint. If the pressure points are wrong, if the slant is off by 5 degrees, if the loop of the R is too wide, it is invalid. I pressed the pen to the paper. I did not sign my name the way I had for 40 years. Instead, I let my hand spasm. I dragged the pen across the page in a jagged, erratic scrawl. I skipped the middle initial entirely. I flattened the loops of the C in Caldwell until they looked like straight lines. To an untrained eye, it looked like the signature of a sick old man. To a handwriting expert or a judge, it was a clear forgery, or a signature made under duress. It would never hold up in court, but it was enough to fool a desperate gambler. I finished the scribble and dropped the pen, letting out a heavy sigh. Is that okay?" I asked. Tyler snatched the paper from the table before the ink was even dry. He stared at it, devouring the sight of the signature. He did not check for accuracy. He only saw $signs. "It is perfect, Dad," he breathed, clutching the document to his chest like a holy relic. "You did the right thing. I am going to take this to the broker right now. You just stay here and rest. Do not answer the phone. Do not open the door." He turned and practically ran out of the room, already dialing his phone as he went. I watched him go, a wave of cold satisfaction washing over me. He thought he held the keys to the kingdom. In reality, he was holding a confession note that I would use to bury him. He was going to sell a house he did not own using a document that was legally worthless to pay a debt to criminals who did not accept excuses. The clock was ticking, and Tyler had just accelerated his own destruction. I watched the GPS tracker on my son's phone from the safety of my study. The blue dot had stopped exactly where I wanted it to be, at a boutique real estate firm on the edge of town. Tyler thought he was walking into a stranger's office to make a quick deal. He had no idea he was walking into the office of Elias Henderson, a man I had played poker with for 20 years, and who was the godfather to the very son trying to rob me. Through the audio bug I had slipped into Tyler's jacket pocket. Earlier I heard every word of the meeting. Tyler sounded manic, his voice too loud and too fast. He pushed the forged power of attorney across the mahogany desk. "I need to liquidate the estate immediately," he said. "My father is very sick. We need the cash for his medical treatments in Switzerland." Elias played his part perfectly. I could hear the rustle of papers as he pretended to examine the jagged, shaky signature I had provided. He paused for a long, agonizing moment. "This signature looks distinct," Elias said slowly, "but the document seems to be in order. However, given the speed you require, I cannot offer market value. The house is worth $8 million, but for a 24-hour cash closing, I can only offer $4 million. I held my breath. A rational man would have walked away. A man who loved his father would have fought for the full value. But Tyler was neither. He was a desperate addict with a death threat hanging over his head. "Done," Tyler blurted out instantly. $4 million is fine. Just wire the money." "When will it clear?" "Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Elias replied smoothly. "I will have the paperwork drawn up." I heard the sound of a handshake. It was the sound of my son selling his birthright for 50 cents on the dollar. He practically ran out of the office, leaving behind the only asset that could have secured his future. 30 minutes later, the audio feed switched to the living room of Gary's house. Tyler burst in, screaming with joy. "We did it," he yelled. "He bought it. $4 million. The wire hits tomorrow morning." I heard the pop of a cork. Again. They were celebrating the sale of a house they did not own with money that would never arrive. Gary's voice boomed through the speaker. "You see, I told you the old man was soft. We are rich, Patricia. Pack your bags. Mexico is waiting." Patricia's laughter was the sharpest blade. She talked about buying a villa in Cabo, about how she would never have to endure another winter in Connecticut with me. They toasted to my stupidity. They toasted to their brilliance. I sat in my library staring at the empty fireplace. They were so happy. They were so sure. They had no idea that Elias had not filed a single paper. There was no buyer. There was no $4 million. The only thing that had been exchanged was a confession of fraud recorded in high-definition audio. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to Elias. It was just 2 words. "Good game." Then I texted Tyler. I kept it simple. "Son, I am feeling a bit better. I want to hold a prayer service for Mom tonight. Please come get me." It was time to bring all the rats into one cage. The trap was set, the cheese was poisoned, and they were all rushing to take the first bite. I sat in the passenger seat of my Mercedes, while Tyler drove us back from the fake meeting with the broker. He was tapping the steering wheel, humming a tune high on the adrenaline of thinking he had just secured $4 million. He had no idea the money was imaginary. I looked out the window at the passing trees, my face a mask of weary grief, but my mind was sharpening the final blade. "Tyler," I said softly, interrupting his humming. "I have a request. A dying man's request, really." Tyler glanced at me, his eyes wide with fake sympathy. "Anything, Dad." "What do you need?" "I want to hold a memorial service for your mother tonight," I said. "Just a small gathering, the family. But I do not want to do it here at the estate. The house feels too empty without her." I want to do it at your Uncle Gary's house. The car swerved slightly as Tyler gripped the wheel. His knuckles turned white. Gary's house, he stammered. Why there, Mom? Mom hated that place. She said it was drafty. I sighed, rubbing my temples as if fighting a headache. I had a dream last night, son. A vivid dream. I saw your mother standing in Gary's living room. She was wearing that red dress she loved. She was calling out to me. I feel her spirit is trapped there. I need to go there to say goodbye properly. Tyler looked terrified. He knew exactly why I had seen her in that red dress in my dream. Because she was actually there hiding in the basement or the guest room. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, panic written all over his face. I do not know if Uncle Gary is up for guests, Dad Tyler said, pulling out his phone. Let me call him first. He might be busy. He stepped out of the car to make the call. I cracked my window just enough to hear him. He was pacing back and forth, whispering furiously into the phone. Gary, he is losing it, I heard Tyler hiss. He wants to come over tonight. He says he dreams about Mom being there. It is too risky. What if he sees her? I strained to hear the other side of the conversation, but I did not need to. I saw Tyler's posture relax. He nodded. He smiled a cruel, ugly smile. He hung up and got back into the car. Good news, Dad, Tyler said, starting the engine. Uncle Gary said he would be honored. He wants to toast to Mom's memory. He said he has a special bottle of wine he wants to share with you. I knew exactly what that meant. Gary was not afraid. He was arrogant. He believed the money was hitting the account tomorrow morning. He saw my visit not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Why wait for the arsenic to work over weeks when he could slip a lethal dose into a glass of Cabernet tonight and call it a heart attack brought on by grief? Thank you, Tyler, I whispered, leaning my head back against the seat. That means the world to me. I just want us all to be together one last time. Tyler smirked as he merged back onto the highway. Yeah, Dad. One last time. I closed my eyes. They were inviting me to my own execution. They were going to dress up murder as mercy. But they did not know that I was not bringing a Bible to this prayer service. I was bringing the police, and the ghost of Patricia was about to become the star witness in her own funeral. I told Tyler I needed to stop at the county courthouse on the way to Gary's house. I lied and said I needed to sign a final release form for the funeral home regarding Patricia's empty casket. Tyler complained about the delay, checking his watch nervously, but he let me go. He stayed in the car engine running, texting his loan shark that the money was coming. I walked around the back of the red brick building to a blind spot where two men were waiting for me next to an unmarked black sedan. One was Harper Cole, my attorney, looking pale and grim. The other was Sheriff Miller, a man I had known since we played high school football together 50 years ago. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Here it is, I said, my voice steady. The flash drive contains the video of them plotting to commit fraud and the audio of Tyler selling a house he does not own. The lab report from Dr. Evans confirms the arsenic in the milk. And this, I said, handing over the folded DNA test, proves the motive. Sheriff Miller opened the file. He scanned the toxicology report first. His jaw tightened. Arsenic, he muttered. They are slowly poisoning you, Richard. This is not just fraud. This is attempted capital murder. Then he looked at the DNA test. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a profound sadness. I am so sorry, Richard. I had no idea about the boy. I shook my head. He is not a boy, Jim. He is a 28-year-old man who tried to sell me to a nursing home. Do not waste your pity. Miller slammed the file shut. This is enough. I have probable cause to arrest all three of them right now. I will call in a squad car to pick up Tyler in the parking lot, and we will raid Gary's house immediately. We cannot let you go back in there. It is too dangerous." He reached for the radio on his shoulder. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. My grip was surprisingly strong. "No," I said firmly. Miller looked at me confused. "Richard, they are poisoning you. I cannot let you walk back into that trap." I looked him dead in the eye. "If you arrest them now, it is just a legal proceeding. They will lawyer up. They will blame each other. Patricia will say she was coerced. Tyler will plead ignorance. I do not want them to just go to jail, Jim. I want to break them." I released his wrist and straightened my tie. "I want them all in one room. I want Patricia to come out of hiding. I want Gary to raise a glass to his victory. I want them to feel safe. I want them to think they have won the lottery. And then I want to see the look on their faces when the hammer drops. I want to watch the hope leave their eyes." Harper stepped forward. "Richard, this is incredibly risky. If you drink anything there—" "I will not drink," I interrupted. "I am the one pouring the drinks tonight." I turned back to the sheriff. "Give me 1 hour. Give them time to confess on tape one last time. When I text you the word done, you kick that door down." Miller hesitated, looking at the envelope in his hand, then at his old friend. He saw the resolve in my face. He saw that the architect had become the demolition expert. "Okay," Miller said quietly. 1 hour. But I am having a TAC team outside in the bushes in 20 minutes. If I hear a scream, we are coming in." I nodded and turned around. I walked back to the car where the son of my brother was waiting to drive me to my death. I got in the passenger seat and smiled at him. "All done, Tyler," I said cheerfully. "Let's go see the family." I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master bedroom for the last time. As a victim, I had chosen my attire carefully for this evening. It was not the somber black suit of a grieving widower. It was a midnight blue tuxedo custom tailored in Milan, the same one I had worn 20 years ago when I accepted the Lifetime Achievement Award in architecture. It was a suit of armor made of silk and wool. I adjusted the cufflinks' solid gold squares that caught the light. My hands, which had trembled on purpose for the last 2 days to fool my son, were now as steady as stone. I looked at my reflection. The tired, confused old man was gone. Staring back at me was a predator who had finally woken up. I walked down the grand staircase, slowly savoring the silence of the house. I knew that by tomorrow morning, the energy in this place would be different. It would be cleansed of the greed that had infested it like black mold. At the bottom of the stairs, leaning against the banister, stood Brittany. She was holding a glass of my vintage Pinot Noir, swaying slightly, her face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. She looked me up and down with a sneer that she did not bother to hide. "Well, look at you," she slurred, taking a sip of the wine. "You look like you are going to the Oscars, Richard. Do you really think a dead woman cares what you wear? Or maybe you are dressing up for the nurses at the asylum?" I stopped on the bottom step, looking down at her. She was young, beautiful, and completely rotten on the inside. She was already mentally measuring drapes for this foyer, planning how to redecorate once I was locked away. "I am dressing for an occasion, Brittany," I said calmly. "Tonight is a special night." She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Oh, it is special, all right. You are all dressed up to go see Mom's spirit. You know, looking like that, maybe you really will see her. Maybe you will just drift away in your sleep tonight and go join her. It would be better for everyone, do you not think?" Her words hung in the air, thick with the threat she thought was subtle. She was telling me to my face that I was not expected to survive the night. She thought the arsenic and the shock would finally stop my heart. I stepped off the stairs and walked until I was just inches from her face. I smelled the expensive wine on her breath, wine that she had not earned. I smiled a genuine cold smile that made her blink in confusion. "You are absolutely right, my dear daughter-in-law," I said softly, reaching up to straighten my bow tie. "Tonight is a night of final departures. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, someone is going to leave this life forever. Things will never be the same again. She frowned, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, but too drunk on her own hubris to understand it. She thought I was talking about my own death. She had no idea I was talking about her freedom. A car horn honked aggressively from the driveway. It was Tyler. The executioner was impatient. "Your carriage awaits your majesty," Brittany mocked, stepping aside and making a theatrical bow. "Go say hi to Mom for me. Tell her I love the house." I walked past her without another word. I walked out into the cool evening air where Tyler was revving the engine of the Mercedes. I got into the passenger seat. Tyler looked at my tuxedo and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He was too focused on the $4 million he thought he had made today. As we pulled away from the mansion, I did not look back. I did not need to say goodbye to the house. I knew I would be returning. But the man sitting next to me was driving away from his life for the very last time. Chào bạn, tôi là Hoàng gia Trang mới. Dưới đây là nội dung chi tiết cho đoạn 19, được viết bằng tiếng Anh tối ưu hóa cho giọng đọc AA, liền mạch giàu cảm xúc không ký tự lạ. Đoạn này tập trung vào sự căng thẳng tột độ khi Richard bước vào hang cọp và đối diện với ly rượu tư thần. The Mercedes crunching over the gravel driveway was the only sound in the oppressive silence of the evening. Tyler turned off the ignition and looked at me. His face was a mask of nervous anticipation. He knew what was waiting for me inside. He knew this was a one-way trip. I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, taking a moment to smooth the lapels of my tuxedo. I was not stalling out of fear. I was stalling to give my tactical team outside a few more seconds to get into position in the dark woods surrounding the property. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the house. It was a modern glass box that glowed like a lantern in the night. Through the massive front window, I could see him. Gary, my brother. He was pacing back and forth, checking his watch, rehearsing his lines. When he saw the headlights, he stopped. He composed himself, putting on a somber expression that looked ridiculous on his greedy face. The front door opened before I even reached the steps. Gary stood there, arms wide open. He was wearing a black suit that I knew he had bought for a casino trip, not a funeral. "Richard," he boomed, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I am so glad you came. It is good to have family close in times like this." He pulled me into a hug. I felt his body against mine. It was tense, wired with adrenaline. He did not smell like a grieving brother. He smelled of expensive cologne and triumph. I endured the embrace for a second, fighting the urge to vomit, then pulled away. "Thank you, Gary," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling. I just needed to be somewhere she loved. "I feel her presence here." I walked past him into the living room. The space had been transformed. They had set up a small shrine on the mantel with a framed photo of Patricia and some white candles. It was a nice touch designed to manipulate a broken heart. But I noticed something else. The red velvet curtains were drawn tight, ensuring no one from the outside could see in, and the door to the master bedroom down the hall was firmly shut. I knew she was in there listening, holding her breath, waiting for the thud of my body hitting the floor. "Come sit down," Gary urged, guiding me to the head of the dining table. "We have prepared a small toast, a tribute to Patricia." The table was set for 3. Gary, Tyler, and me. In front of each chair sat a crystal wine glass. Gary moved quickly to the sideboard, where an open bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon was waiting. He poured a glass for Tyler. Then he poured a glass for himself. Finally, he picked up a third glass that was already sitting on a separate tray. It was already poured. The liquid inside was dark and rich, swirling ominously under the chandelier light. "For you, Richard," Gary said, placing the glass in front of me with a steady hand. "I let this one breathe for an hour. It is the 1982 Reserve, Patricia's favorite. I think she would want you to drink it." I looked at the glass. It was the only one that had been pre-poured. It was the only one that had not come directly from the bottle in front of my eyes. It was the murder weapon sitting right there on the polished wood. I looked up at Gary. His eyes were locked on mine, intense and predatory. He was waiting for me to lift it. He was waiting for the arsenic and whatever other cocktail of drugs he had mixed in there to finish the job. I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the stem of the glass. The crystal felt cold. I saw Tyler shift in his seat, licking his dry lips. They were holding their breath. "It is a beautiful color," I said softly, lifting the glass to eye level. "To Patricia. May she get exactly what she deserves tonight." Gary smiled, raising his own glass. "To Patricia." I brought the glass closer to my lips. I could smell the oak and the berries of the wine, but underneath it, I swore I could smell the bitter metallic scent of betrayal. I paused. The glass hovered inches from my mouth. I saw a bead of sweat roll down Gary's temple. He was terrified I would put it down. I was about to give him the fright of his life. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds of a life. I stared at the crystal goblet sitting on the pristine white tablecloth in front of me. The dark red liquid inside looked innocent enough, shimmering under the chandelier light. But I knew better. It was a chalice of death prepared by my own brother, designed to stop my heart before the sun rose. Gary stood at the head of the table, clearing his throat, commanding the room like a king addressing his subject. He held his own glass high, the expensive wine catching the light. To Patricia, he announced, his voice thick with a sorrow that never reached his eyes. To a woman who deserved the world. And to you, Richard, for being strong enough to join us tonight to say a proper goodbye. He looked at me with a sickening mixture of pity and triumph. He was not just toasting to her memory. He was toasting to my imminent demise. He nodded at me, a silent command to pick up my drink. Tyler was watching me too, his leg bouncing nervously under the table, his eyes locked on my hand. I reached out, letting my hand tremble violently, playing the part of the frail, broken old man one last time. My fingers hovered over the stem of the poisoned glass. But instead of grabbing it, I allowed my hand to spasm. I knocked into the heavy silver soup spoon sitting next to my plate. Clang! The sound was sharp and jarring as the spoon hit the edge of the porcelain charger and bounced off the table, clattering loudly onto the hardwood floor beneath us. "Oh dear," I stammered, my face flushing with feigned embarrassment. "My hands. I am so clumsy today." Tyler let out a loud, exasperated sigh. He rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by his father's incompetence. He bent down to his right to retrieve the spoon from under the table. Gary, distracted by the noise and Tyler's movement, looked down at the floor, shaking his head in disgust. In that split second of distraction, with both of their sets of eyes averted, the trembling old man vanished, and the magician appeared. My hand moved with the speed of a striking cobra. I did not lift the glasses. I simply slid them. My glass went to the left. Gary's glass went to the right. The switch took less than a heartbeat. By the time Tyler sat up and slammed the spoon back onto the table, the glasses were swapped. The murder weapon was now sitting directly in front of its creator. "I am so sorry," I mumbled, clasping my hands together. "Thank you, son." Gary, completely oblivious to the fact that his fate had just been sealed, regained his composure. He smiled at me, a smile that was meant to be reassuring, but looked predatory. "Do not worry about it, Richard," he said smoothly. "Just drink. It will help you sleep." He lifted the glass that used to be mine. I lifted the glass that used to be his. "To family," Gary said. "To justice," I whispered, though he did not hear me. I watched in slow motion as he tilted his head back. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. He drank deep. He drank the arsenic. He drank the sedatives. He drank the very poison he had mixed for his own brother. He lowered the glass, licking his lips, savoring the vintage. "Delicious, isn't it?" he asked. I took a sip of the safe wine. It tasted like victory. It certainly is, Gary, I replied, staring deep into his eyes. I have a feeling this will be a drink you remember for the rest of your life, however short that may be. Gary blinked, his hand going to his forehead. He swayed slightly in his chair, a frown creasing his brow. That wine, he muttered, his speech slurring just a fraction. It has quite a kick. I feel a bit lightheaded. He chuckled, dismissing the early warning signs of a neurotoxin as merely the effects of a good vintage. He reached for the bottle to pour himself another glass, but his hand missed the neck by an inch. He frowned, staring at his own fingers, as if they belonged to someone else. Tyler, meanwhile, was oblivious to his biological father's deteriorating state. He was too focused on the prize. He pulled a folder from under his chair and slapped it onto the table right next to the spilled soup spoon. Dad, Tyler said urgently, pushing a pen toward me. Since we are all here and in good spirits, let us get the boring stuff out of the way. This is the transfer form for the life insurance payout. We need to move it to the joint family trust so we can, manage it better for you. I looked at the document. It was the final key to the vault. Once I signed this, $4 million would flow directly into their control. Tyler tapped the paper impatiently. Sign it now, Dad, so we can focus on remembering Mom. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. It felt cold and solid in my hand. I looked at Tyler. I looked at Gary, who was now rubbing his temples, his face pale and sweaty. The room felt electric. This was the moment, the pivot point. I brought the pen to the paper. Tyler leaned in, his eyes hungry. I let the tip of the pen hover over the signature line, and then with a flick of my wrist, I threw the pen across the room. It hit the far wall with a sharp crack, leaving a splatter of black ink on the expensive wallpaper. What the hell, Dad? Tyler shouted, jumping back. What are you doing? I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. The trembling was gone. The confusion was gone. I looked at him with eyes that were clear and cold as ice. I am not signing anything, I said, my voice steady and deep. Not for you, and certainly not for a stranger. Tyler looked confused. Stranger? What are you talking about? I am your son, I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. No, you are not. You are a bad investment I made 28 years ago. And tonight I am closing the account. Gary tried to stand up. Richard, he slurred, bracing his hands on the table. What? What did you say? I turned my gaze to my brother. Sit down, Gary, I commanded. You are looking a little pale. It must be the wine. Or maybe it is the arsenic. The word hung in the air like smoke. Gary frozen. Tyler froze. The color drained from both of their faces. Arsenic, Gary whispered, his eyes widening in horror. Yes, I replied, picking up my glass of safe wine and taking a calm sip. The same arsenic you put in my milk. The same arsenic you put in this glass before I switched them. You really should be more careful with your glassware, brother. You never know who is watching. Gary looked down at his empty glass. Then he looked at me. Then he grabbed his throat, a look of pure primal terror taking over his face. He realized in that split second that the hunter had become the prey, and the poison was already in his blood. The heavy oak door to the master bedroom flew open with such force that the brass handle punched a hole in the drywall. The sound echoed through the room like a thunderclap, shattering the tense silence that had settled over the dinner table. It was not a spirit manifesting from the ether to haunt us. It was my wife, Patricia, in the flesh, and she looked nothing like a woman who had drowned in a boating accident. She stormed into the living room, her high heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor, her red silk dress swirling around her legs like a flame. She had clearly lost her patience, hiding in the dark, listening to her foolproof plan unravel. She looked furious, her face flushed with adrenaline and rage, her hair perfectly styled, her diamonds glittering under the chandelier. She ignored Tyler, who was staring at her with his mouth open, and she stepped right over Gary, who was clutching his stomach and groaning in his chair. She marched straight up to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You useless, incompetent cowards!" she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. He knows everything. Stop trying to get him to sign the papers and just finish it." She grabbed a steak knife from the table and pointed it at my chest, her hand shaking, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a cornered animal. "Sign the paper, Richard," she hissed. "Sign it, or I will carve your signature into your chest myself. I am already dead on paper. I have nothing to lose." I did not flinch. I did not recoil. I sat there in my tuxedo looking up at her with a calm, bemused expression. I slowly lifted my hands and began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Clap, clap, clap. The sound infuriated her. "Bravo," I said, my voice smooth and mocking. "What an entrance. Welcome back, my love. I assumed hell spat you out because you were too toxic even for the devil to stomach. Or perhaps the rent in the underworld was just too high for your budget." Patricia's eyes widened. She had expected me to be terrified. She had expected the confused, senile old man she had been gaslighting for months. Instead, she was looking at a man who was completely in control. "Shut up," she shrieked, lunging forward slightly with the knife. "You think this is funny? You think you can walk out of here? We have the numbers, Richard. There are 3 of us and 1 of you." I took a sip of my wine, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "Actually, darling, I think your math is a little off. Look at your team." I gestured to the side. Gary had slumped forward onto the table, his breathing ragged and shallow, as the arsenic began to shut down his nervous system. He knocked over his wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a pool of blood. "Gary is currently indisposed," I said coldly. "He seems to have a bit of a stomach ache. And as for your son—" I looked at Tyler. He was staring at his mother, but there was no love in his eyes. There was only horror and betrayal. He was looking at the woman who had lied to him about his father for 28 years. Patricia looked at Gary, then back at me. Her confidence faltered for a fraction of a second. "What did you do to him?" she whispered. "I did nothing," I replied, standing up slowly and smoothing out my jacket. "I simply let him drink from his own cup." "It is poetic, really. You wanted to poison my life, Patricia, but you forgot that when you dig a grave for someone else, you usually fall in it yourself. You are not a ghost, my dear. You are just a criminal who forgot to check the exits." Tyler stared at the woman standing in the center of the room, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The mother he had mourned just hours ago, the woman whose eulogy he had rehearsed, was standing there screaming about money. The cognitive dissonance was breaking him. "Mom," he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager. "You are alive. You let me think you were at the bottom of the lake. You let me cry for you." Patricia did not even look at him. She was too focused on the failing plan. "Grow up, Tyler," she snapped, waving the knife dismissively. "We did what we had to do to secure the bag. Stop being so sentimental and help me get the signature." I watched him crumble. The boy who thought he was a ruthless shark was just a minnow swimming in a tank of piranhas. But I was not done with him yet. I had one more grenade to throw, and I had pulled the pin 28 years ago. "Stop whining, Tyler," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "She lied to you about her death. But that is the smallest lie she has ever told you. In fact, her entire life with you has been a forgery." Tyler looked at me, the confusion warring with fear in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket. I pulled out the folded piece of paper I had retrieved from the shed. I did not hand it to him gently. I crumpled it into a ball and threw it hard. It hit him square in the chest and fell onto the table next to the spilled wine. "Read it," I commanded. "Read the part where it says probability of paternity." Tyler picked up the paper with shaking hands. He unfolded it. I watched his eyes scan the medical jargon. I watched the moment the words hit his brain. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the paper, then at me, then at the paper again. "No," he whispered. This is fake." "It is from the Boston Genetics Lab," I said cold. "You are not my son, Tyler. You never were. You are the product of a cheap, sordid affair between a gold digger and a convict. You do not have my blood in your veins. You have his." I pointed a finger at Gary. The poison was taking full effect now. Gary was slumped over the arm of his chair, drooling slightly, his skin waxy and yellow. He looked pathetic. He looked weak. He looked exactly like what he was, a loser. Tyler turned his head slowly to look at Gary. He saw the man he had called uncle. He saw the resemblance he had always ignored. The weak chin, the shifting eyes, the desperate greed. He realized that his biological father was not the millionaire architect standing tall in a tuxedo. His father was the dying man, groaning in his own filth. The realization hit Tyler like a physical blow. He dropped the paper as if it were covered in disease. He backed away, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked at Patricia, who was refusing to meet his gaze. "You," he choked out, bile rising in his throat. "You made me call him Dad, but you were sleeping with him. You made me betray the only man who ever took care of us. For him, I took a step forward." "That is right, Tyler. You sold your soul for an inheritance that was never yours. You are not a Caldwell heir. You are just a bastard son of a thief. And now you are nothing." The sound of crystal shattering against the hardwood floor marked the beginning of the end for my brother. Gary tried to stand up, perhaps to attack me or perhaps to flee, but his legs had turned to water. He collapsed heavily, his upper body slamming into the edge of the table before sliding down to the floor. The sound he made was not a scream. It was a wet, gurgling choke, like a drain backing up. Patricia dropped the steak knife she had been threatening me with. It clattered uselessly onto the rug. She forgot about me instantly. She forgot about the money. Panic, raw and ugly, took over her face. She rushed to Gary's side, falling to her knees in her expensive silk dress, not caring that she was ruining it in the puddle of spilled wine and vomit. "Gary," she screamed, shaking him by the shoulders. "Gary, look at me. Breathe. Spit it out." But Gary could not spit it out. His eyes were rolling back in his head, showing the whites, and his jaw was locked tight. A thick white foam began to bubble at the corners of his mouth, dripping down onto his chin. His hands were clawing at his throat, tearing at his shirt collar as if he were trying to rip an invisible noose from his neck. He was convulsing his heels, drumming a frantic rhythmic beat against the floorboards. Patricia was hysterical. She pried his jaw open with her manicured fingers, shoving her hand into his mouth to try and induce vomiting. She was screaming for Tyler to call an ambulance, her voice cracking with terror. But Tyler did not move. He stood frozen against the wall, watching the man who was his biological father writhe in agony. He looked like he was watching a monster die. I did not move to help. I did not call for help. I simply pulled out my chair and sat down, crossing my legs comfortably. I smoothed a wrinkle in my tuxedo pants and looked down at the chaotic scene with the detachment of a scientist observing a lab rat. "Save your energy, Patricia," I said, my voice cutting through her shrieks like a razor blade. "You cannot get it out of his system. It is already in his blood." She looked up at me, her hands covered in his saliva and wine. "You monster," she sobbed. "You killed him. You murdered him." I shook my head slowly. "I did no such thing. I am merely a mirror, Patricia." I reflected his own intentions back at him. "And do not worry, he is not going to die. Not tonight, at least." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, so I could look directly into Gary's terrified, fading eyes. You see, I continued my tone conversational. Gary was very specific with his dosage. He did not want to kill me instantly. That would trigger an autopsy. That would look suspicious. He wanted to incapacitate me. He wanted to cause a series of mini strokes that would leave me paralyzed, unable to speak, unable to sign checks, but fully conscious. He wanted me to be a vegetable in a wheelchair, so you two could control my estate while I drooled in a corner. Gary's convulsions began to slow down, but not because he was getting better. His body was shutting down. His limbs went rigid. His eyes fixed on mine, wide and full of a silent, screaming horror. "That is exactly what is happening to you now, brother," I whispered. "You are going to be a prisoner in your own skull. You will hear everything. You will see everything. But you will never move a finger again. You wanted to make me a living statue. Well, congratulations. You are the masterpiece now." The room descended into the kind of chaos that usually only happens in nature documentaries when the pack turns on itself. The silence that followed my revelation about Tyler's parentage did not last long. It was broken by a sound that was half sob, half roar. Tyler looked down at the man, convulsing on the floor, the biological father he had never known, and then he looked at the mother who had orchestrated this entire tragedy. Something inside him snapped. The fragile veneer of the spoiled rich boy cracked, revealing a desperate, violent animal underneath. He did not rush to help his mother clean up the vomit. Instead, he lunged at her. He collided with Patricia, knocking her back against the sideboard. Expensive china plates crashed to the floor, shattering into dust, but neither of them cared. Tyler's hand that had never done a day of hard labor in their life wrapped around Patricia's throat. "You lied to me," he screamed, spitting saliva into her face. "You made me a joke. You told me this was airtight. You told me the old man would just drift off to sleep and we would be rich by morning." Patricia clawed at his wrists, her face turning a blotchy red. She kicked at his shins, her heels tearing his suit pants, but Tyler was fueled by 28 years of deception. He was squeezing the life out of the woman who had turned him into a fraud. "Look at him," Tyler yelled, jerking his head toward Gary's paralyzed body. "Look at what you did. You turned me into the son of a cripple. You spent my inheritance before I even got it. You promised me safety, and you gave me this." I sat back in my chair, sipping my wine, watching the family reunion implode. It was fascinating to see how quickly their loyalty evaporated when the money was taken off the table. They were not a family. They were a cartel, and the business had just gone bankrupt. Brittany, standing by the wall, decided she had seen enough. The survival instinct of a rat on a sinking ship took over. She did not try to pull her husband off his mother. She did not try to help the dying uncle. She simply hiked up her dress and bolted for the front door. I heard her heels clatter frantically against the floorboards as she ran toward the foyer. She reached the massive oak door, the same door Gary had opened so welcomingly just 20 minutes ago. She grabbed the brass handle and yanked it down. It did not budge. She pulled again, harder, throwing her shoulder against the wood. It was solid as rock. She twisted the deadbolt, but it spun freely. She let out a frustrated shriek and turned around, her eyes wild with panic. "It is locked!" she screamed, her voice shrill. "Richard, open this door! Open it right now!" I turned in my chair to face her, resting my chin on my hand. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Brittany. You see, when I walked in, I took the liberty of engaging the deadlock with my own key. A key I kept from before the locks were changed. And then I snapped the key off in the cylinder. I held up a small, jagged piece of brass for her to see. The blood drained from her face. "No one is leaving," I said calmly. "The party is just getting started, and it would be rude to leave before the guests of honor arrive. You wanted to live in this house, Brittany. Now you are locked inside it." I reached across the table, ignoring the splatter of wine and the sounds of my brother choking on his own saliva, and picked up the silver remote control that was sitting on the sideboard. The fighting stopped instantly. Tyler released his grip on Patricia's neck, his chest heaving, his tie hanging loose around his collar. Patricia slid down the wall, gasping for air, rubbing the red marks forming on her throat. They both froze, watching me with the terrified obedience of children caught playing with matches. I pointed the remote at the massive 60-inch flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. I pressed a single button. The screen flared to life, filling the room with a bright, high-definition glow. It was not a cable news channel. It was not a movie. It was a home video. The image on the screen was crystal clear. It showed this very room bathed in sunlight from yesterday morning. It showed Gary sitting in the same chair he was currently dying in, but on the screen he looked healthy and arrogant. It showed Patricia wearing her red dress sitting in his lap. It showed Tyler laughing, holding a beer. The audio was perfect. Gary's voice boomed through the surround sound speakers, echoing off the walls of the real room. "The $4 million is just the appetizer, the on-screen," Gary said, shaking the pill bottle. "The main course is Richard's estate. We will have him declared mentally incompetent by Christmas." I turned the volume up. The sound of their cruel laughter filled the air, mocking the miserable, broken people they had become in reality. On the screen, Patricia was talking about the life insurance. Tyler was making jokes about the shed. It was a comprehensive frame-by-frame documentation of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and elder abuse. Tyler stared at the TV, his face pale as a sheet. He looked from the screen to me, his eyes wide with horror. "You filmed us," he whispered. "You were watching the whole time." I did not answer him immediately. I let the video play until the part where Gary detailed the dosage of the arsenic. I wanted them to hear their own death sentences spoken in their own voices. Then I pressed the mute button. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy and suffocating. I walked over to the television and stood next to it, placing a hand on the warm screen. "You are looking at this the wrong way, Tyler," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "You think this is just a recording I made for my lawyer. You think you can destroy the tape or claim it is a deep fake." I shook my head, a small pitying smile playing on my lips. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned the screen toward them. It showed a live feed of the video playing on the TV with a timer counting up in the corner. "I have been live streaming this entire evening," I said. "For the last 15 minutes, this feed has been broadcasting directly to the secure server of the county sheriff's department. I gave Sheriff Miller the link an hour ago. He and his deputies have been watching this party from the very beginning. They heard you confess to the fraud. They saw you attack your mother. And they watched Gary drink the poison he meant for me." Patricia let out a low moan and buried her face in her hands. Brittany slumped against the locked door, sliding down until she hit the floor. "You are not just criminals," I continued, my voice hardening. "You are reality TV stars. The police have seen everything. There is no trial needed. There is no defense attorney in the world who can talk you out of this. You did not just dig your own graves. You televised the funeral. And if you listen closely right about now, you can hear the audience arriving." As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the night air, growing louder with every second coming to collect the trash. The flashing red and blue lights from the driveway bathed the living room in a chaotic strobe light nightmare. The sirens cut out abruptly, replaced by the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots pounding across the wooden porch. The locked front door, the one Brittany had failed to open, exploded inward with a deafening crash as a battering ram turned the expensive oak frame into splinters. A sea of dark uniforms flooded into the house, their weapons drawn, their voices booming commands that bounced off the glass walls. "Police, get on the ground," they shouted. "Hands behind your head. Do not move." Tyler was the first to fall. He was still standing near the sideboard, shaking with adrenaline, looking for a way out that did not exist. 2 officers tackled him before he could even raise his hands. I watched my non-biological son hit the floor hard, his face pressed against the same wood where he had spilled the wine. He screamed as they wrenched his arms behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs signaling the end of his freedom. He was shouting about his rights, shouting that it was all a mistake, but no one was listening. He was just another criminal being processed. Paramedics pushed past the officers carrying a yellow stretcher and a heavy medical bag. They swarmed over Gary's paralyzed body. My brother was still conscious, his eyes wide and darting frantically, but his body was as rigid as a stone. They checked his pulse, shined a light in his frozen pupils, and began shouting medical jargon about neurotoxins and immediate transport. As they lifted him onto the gurney, his gaze locked onto mine one last time. I did not look away. I raised my wine glass in a silent farewell. He was leaving this house not as a victor, but as evidence. Patricia was not going quietly. A female officer had grabbed her by the arm, but Patricia was fighting with the ferocity of a cornered cat. She dug her heels into the rug, her red dress torn, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. She saw me sitting calmly amidst the storm, untouched and unbothered. "You sick, twisted old man!" she screamed, her voice raw and guttural. "You set us up. You lured us here. You are the devil, Richard. You engineered this whole thing. This is entrapment." The officer jerked her arm, forcing her toward the door, but Patricia kept her head turned toward me, spitting her venom until the very end. "You ruined us," she shrieked. "You trapped us in the dark." I stood up slowly, placing my empty glass on the table. I walked over to where they were dragging her away. I leaned in close so only she could hear me over the commotion. "I did not set a trap, Patricia," I said, my voice low and smooth. "I simply turned the lights on. It is not my fault that cockroaches are afraid of the light." She opened her mouth to scream again, but the officer pushed her through the broken doorway and out into the cool night air. I stood alone in the center of the room. The house was empty now, save for the police gathering evidence. The wine was spilled. The family was destroyed. And for the first time in 30 years, the air in the room felt clean. I took a deep breath, adjusted my cufflinks, and prepared to walk out of the wreckage as the only man standing. I stood in the small, darkened observation room, the air smelling faintly of stale coffee and floor wax. The only light came from the other side of the thick, one-way mirror. It cast a harsh, clinical glow on the scene playing out in front of me. The interrogation room was stark and cold, a perfect setting for the ugly truth to finally be spoken. Patricia sat at the metal table. Gone was the red silk dress and the diamond earrings. She was wearing a baggy orange jumpsuit that made her look small and gray. Her hair was messy and her makeup was smeared across her cheeks. She was not crying out of remorse. She was crying out of calculation. She leaned forward, her handcuffs rattling against the table, staring at the detective with wide, pleading eyes. "It was Gary," she sobbed, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility. "It was all Gary. I was afraid of him. You have to understand. He is a violent man. He threatened to kill me if I did not go along with the insurance fraud. He forced me to hide in that house. I wanted to come forward, but I was terrified." I watched her through the glass, my face an unmoving mask of stone. Gary was currently lying in an intensive care unit, a ventilator tube down his throat. His body paralyzed by the neurotoxin he had mixed for me. He could not speak. He could not defend himself. And Patricia knew it. She was piling every single sin they had committed onto his frozen shoulders. She was painting herself as a helpless victim of a mastermind, when in reality she was the architect of the entire scheme. It was the ultimate betrayal. She had slept with him, plotted with him, and now that he was broken, she was using his body as a shield to save herself. In the adjacent interrogation room, the scene was different but equally pathetic. Tyler sat slumped in his chair. He was not trying to manipulate. He was crumbling. The reality of prison had shattered his arrogance completely. He was weeping openly, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I want a deal," he blubbered to the stone-faced officer. "I can give you everything. I have the emails. I have the text messages. I know where Gary bought the arsenic. I can testify against both of them. Just please do not put me in general population. I will not survive in there." He was selling them out. He was selling out the mother who had lied to him and the father he had just met. He listed every crime, every forgery, every conversation. He described how they laughed about putting me in the shed. He described the plan to drug me into dementia. He offered up their secrets like currency, desperate to buy back a fraction of his freedom. I stood there for an hour watching the people I had once called family tear each other apart. There was no loyalty in that room. There was no love. There was only the desperate clawing instinct of rats on a sinking ship. They were eating each other alive. Sheriff Miller opened the door behind me. "You have seen enough, Richard," he said quietly. "We have full confessions from both of them. And with Gary's condition, he is not going anywhere. It is an open and shut case." I nodded slowly, taking one last look at Patricia through the glass. She was still talking, still blaming, still lying. I felt a weight lift off my chest, a weight I had been carrying for 30 years. I turned my back on the window. "I am done," I said. "Lock them up. I have a life to get back to." The fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to be the only sound in the world. I stood at the foot of the metal bed looking down at the man who had been my brother. Gary was hooked up to a symphony of machines. Tubes snaked down his throat, wires taped to his chest, monitored a heart that refused to stop beating, and a catheter bag hung discreetly by the floor. He looked smaller than he had last night. The arrogance, the swagger, the greed, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a husk of a man trapped in a prison of his own making. The doctor had just left the room after delivering the prognosis. He called it locked-in syndrome. He explained that the specific combination of the arsenic dose, the alcohol, and the massive hypertensive spike from the shock had caused a catastrophic stroke in the brainstem. The result was a medical nightmare. Gary was not brain dead. He was not in a coma. He was fully conscious. He could hear the nurses gossiping in the hallway. He could feel the rough texture of the hospital sheets. He could smell the antiseptic cleaner. He could think reason and remember. But he could not move. He could not speak. He could not even blink on command. He was a fully sentient mind, buried alive inside a corpse that was still breathing. I walked to the side of the bed and leaned in close. His eyes were open, fixed permanently on the ceiling tiles, but as I entered his field of vision, I saw a subtle shift. The pupils dilated. It was a spark of pure, undiluted terror. He knew I was there. He knew exactly what was happening. "Hello, Gary," I said softly, my voice calm and steady. "The doctor tells me you are going to live. You have a very strong heart, ironically enough. You could live for another 20 or 30 years like this." I rested my hand on the metal rail of the bed. I saw his pulse rate on the monitor jump from 70 to 110. He was screaming at me inside his head. He was begging, cursing, pleading. But the only sound in the room was the rhythmic mechanical hiss of the ventilator. "I wanted to tell you about your new home," I continued. "Since you have been charged with attempted murder and fraud, you will be transferred to the State Penitentiary Medical Wing once you are stable. It is not quite the villa in Mexico you and Patricia were dreaming of. The walls are gray concrete. The lights stay on 24 hours a day. And the staff there are not known for their gentle bedside manner." I leaned in closer until my face was inches from his frozen stare. "You wanted to drug me, Gary. You wanted to make me a vegetable so you could control my life. You wanted to trap me in a body that did not work so you could spend my money. You projected your own fate onto me. And now you are living the exact nightmare you designed for your brother." I straightened up and buttoned my jacket. "I will not be visiting you, Gary. I have a life to live. I have a business to rebuild. And you have a lot of thinking to do. You have decades of silence ahead of you to replay every mistake, every lie, and every betrayal. You are going to be the lonely king of a silent kingdom." I turned and walked toward the door. I paused with my hand on the handle and looked back. The heart monitor was beeping frantically, a digital cry for help. "Goodbye, brother," I said. "Enjoy the quiet." I walked out of the room and let the heavy door swing shut, sealing him in his silent tomb forever. The revenge was complete, and it was far more terrible than any bullet could have ever been. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom closed behind the bailiff, sealing the fate of the family that had tried to consume me. The air inside was cool and smelled of furniture polish and old paper. I sat in the front row, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on my knees. I was the victim on paper, but in reality I was the architect who had just overseen the demolition of a condemned building. The judge was a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked down at the defendants with a mixture of disappointment and professional fatigue. Patricia stood up first. 6 months in county jail awaiting trial had stripped away her glamour. Her hair was gray at the roots, her skin was sallow, and she looked every minute of her age. She trembled as the judge spoke. Patricia Caldwell, the judge, said, her voice echoing in the silent room. For the crimes of insurance fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, I sentence you to 20 years in a federal correctional facility without the possibility of parole. Patricia let out a sob that sounded like a dry branch snapping. Her legs gave out, and her attorney had to hold her up. 20 years. She would be an old woman when she got out, if she survived at all. She looked back at me, her eyes pleading for mercy for an intervention that would never come. I simply nodded at her, a silent acknowledgement of the transaction. She had gambled her life and the house had won. Next was Tyler. He stood up, wiping his nose on the sleeve of his orange jumpsuit. He looked like a frightened child, not the arrogant man who had laughed about locking me in a shed. Because he had testified against his mother and given up the evidence on Gary, the court was lenient. But not too lenient. Tyler Caldwell, the judge, announced, "For your role in the conspiracy and for multiple counts of fraud and forgery, you are sentenced to 10 years in state prison." Tyler put his head in his hands and wept. He did not look at me. He knew there was no father left to save him. The paternity test had severed the last thread of obligation I felt toward him. He was a stranger who had tried to rob me, and now he was paying the price. Then came the civil ruling. The judge turned her attention to the mountain of documents on her bench. She declared the power of attorney document null and void, citing the obvious duress and the deliberate forgery of my signature. She ordered the immediate restoration of all assets to my name. The house, the bank accounts, the investments. Everything that they had tried to steal was returned to me in full. In the gallery behind me, I heard a sharp intake of breath. It was Brittany. She had been sitting there hoping, praying that somehow she would be allowed to keep the condo or the car or some scrap of the lifestyle she felt entitled to. The judge crushed that hope instantly. She issued an immediate eviction order for any unauthorized occupants of my properties. As the bailiffs led Patricia and Tyler away in handcuffs, the sound of the chains rattling was the final punctuation mark on their betrayal. I stood up and walked toward the exit. Brittany was waiting for me in the aisle. She looked desperate, clutching a cheap purse, her eyes wide with panic. "Richard," she stammered, reaching out to touch my arm. "Please, I have nowhere to go. They are kicking me out of the condo today. I did not know about the poison. You cannot leave me on the street." I stepped back, avoiding her touch, as if she were contagious. I looked at her with cold indifference. "You watched them plan my death, and you did nothing." "Brittany," I said. "You laughed when they talked about putting me in a shed. Now you can see what it feels like to be homeless. You have until sunset to get your things off my property. After that, I am calling the police." I walked past her and pushed open the heavy doors. The sunlight outside was blindingly bright. It hit my face with a warmth I had not felt in a long time. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. I was alone. I had no wife, no brother, no son. But as I walked down the courthouse steps, I realized I had something far more valuable. I had my life back, and for the first time in years, it belonged entirely to me. The visiting room at the state penitentiary was a study in gray. Gray walls, gray floors, and men in gray spirits sitting on bolted-down metal stools. The air smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies, a sharp contrast to the lavender and old leather smell of the home I had reclaimed. I sat behind the thick plexiglass partition waiting. I was not there to gloat. I was not there to offer legal aid. I was there to perform an amputation. The heavy steel door on the inmate side buzzed and clanked open. Tyler walked in. In just 2 weeks, he had aged 10 years. His designer haircut was gone, replaced by a jagged, uneven buzz cut. His skin was sallow, breaking out in stress acne, and his eyes were rimmed with dark, bruised circles. He looked small in his oversized jumpsuit. He looked like a child who had lost his mother at a supermarket, not a man who had conspired to murder his father. He sat down and snatched the black phone receiver from the wall. He pressed it to his ear with trembling hands. I picked up my side slowly, my face betraying nothing. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking instantly into a sob. "Oh God, Dad, thank you for coming. You have to get me out of here. I cannot do this. They look at me like I am fresh meat. I am scared, Dad. Please, I am begging you." I listened to him cry. I watched the tears track through the grime on his face. Once that sight would have torn my heart out. I would have moved mountains to stop his pain. Today I felt as much emotion as I would looking at a stranger on the news. "I am not here to get you out, Tyler," I said, my voice flat and hollow. "I am here to say goodbye." Tyler flinched as if I had slapped him through the glass. "No, do not say that," he pleaded, leaning forward until his forehead touched the plastic. "Listen to me. I know about the DNA test. I know Gary is my biological father. But that does not matter. Blood does not make a father, Dad. You raised me. You taught me to ride a bike. You were there for my graduation. For 28 years, I have called you Dad. Does that mean nothing to you?" He was playing the emotional card, the last weapon in his arsenal. He was trying to leverage the memories I had cherished against the crimes he had committed. I looked him dead in the eye. I remembered the video of him laughing. I remembered him calling me an old fool. I remembered him throwing the keys on the table and condemning me to the shed. "It means everything to me, Tyler," I replied. "But it meant nothing to you." "You are right. I was your father for 28 years, but you stopped being my son the moment you decided my life was worth less than a real estate deal." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "You call me Dad now because you are desperate." I continued, my voice hardening. "You call me Dad because you need money for a lawyer or protection or a commissary deposit. You call me Dad when I am useful, but when I was an obstacle, when I was just an old man standing between you and a fortune, then I was just a nuisance to be drugged and discarded." I took a deep breath. The word Dad is a sacred title, Tyler. It is earned through love and trust, but you treated it like a credit card. You maxed it out, and now the transaction is declined. That word is too expensive for you. I am not buying it anymore. Tyler's face crumbled. He realized the manipulation was not working. The desperation turned to anger, then back to panic. "Dad, wait, no." I hung up the phone. The click was final. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. I did not look at him again. I turned my back on the glass, on the tears, and on the 28 years of lies. I walked toward the exit door, leaving the stranger in the orange jumpsuit screaming silently behind the soundproof glass. I walked out into the parking lot, got into my car, and for the first time in a long time, I drove home with a smile on my face. I steered the Jaguar away from the gated communities and manicured lawns of the suburbs, and into a part of the city I usually only saw on the evening news. The streets here were narrow and lined with potholes that swallowed the tires. The buildings were gray blocks of crumbling concrete, their windows barred with rusted iron laundry hanging limply from lines strung across the alleyways. It was a stark, depressing contrast to the opulence of the estate I had just reclaimed, and it broke my heart to know that this was where Maria had been living. Maria was the quiet, invisible woman who had scrubbed my floors and folded my shirts for 10 years. She was the one who had slipped the warning note into my shoe, risking her job, and likely her safety to warn me about the poison. She was the only person in that house of vipers who had shown me an ounce of humanity. I parked the car in front of a tenement building with peeling yellow paint. A group of teenagers on the corner stopped talking to stare at the luxury vehicle, but I did not care. I locked the doors and walked up the 3 flights of stairs that smelled of cabbage and old cigarettes. I found apartment 3B and knocked gently on the chipped wood. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, the chain stayed on. Maria peered through the crack, her eyes wide with fear. She looked tired, her face lined with the stress of unemployment and poverty. When she recognized me, she gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Mr. Richard," she whispered quickly, undoing the chain and pulling the door open. "Oh my God. I saw the news. I saw what happened. I was so worried they would hurt you before you found my note." I stepped into her small, dim apartment. It was clean, spotless, even, but it was heartbreakingly poor. A single fan turned slowly in the corner, fighting the stifling heat. "I found the note, Maria," I said, taking off my hat. "You were the only one who told me the truth. You saved my life. If I had drunk that milk or the wine, I would be dead or paralyzed right now. Everyone I loved tried to kill me. You were the only one who tried to save me." Maria looked down at her worn slippers. "I only did what was right, sir. You were always kind to me. I could not watch them hurt you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet box and a thick envelope. I took her rough, calloused hands in mine. "Maria," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "you lost your job because of them. You have been living in fear. That ends today." I placed the velvet box in her hand. She opened it to reveal a shiny silver key with a fob for a luxury building downtown. "This is the deed and key to a 2-bedroom condo in the Brighton Towers," I explained. "It is fully furnished. It has a doorman, a view of the park, and it is safe. It is yours, fully paid for." She stared at the key, shaking her head. "No, Mr. Richard. I cannot. This is too much." I pressed the envelope into her other hand. "And this is a savings account in your name. There is $500,000 in there. It is enough to retire, Maria. You never have to scrub another floor again. You never have to worry about rent again." Tears began to spill down her cheeks, hot and fast. She trembled, looking from the money to me, unable to speak. She tried to push it back, but I closed her fingers around it. "Please," I whispered. "You gave me a second chance at life. You gave me a future. Let me give you one in return. You saved me, Maria. Now let me save you." She collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably, the sound of years of hardship finally breaking. I held her, the woman who was more family to me than my own blood, and for the first time in weeks, the tears in my own eyes were tears of gratitude. The ink on the final closing documents for the estate was barely dry when I walked out of the lawyer's office for the last time. I had sold the mansion, the furniture, the art collection, and the cars. I sold every single physical object that held a memory of Patricia or Tyler. I did not want the money for the sake of being rich. I wanted the liquidation for the sake of being light. I wanted to shed the heavy golden skin of my past life so I could finally breathe. I stood on the teak deck of my new home. She was a 60-foot expedition yacht I had named the Second Act. She was sturdy, built for crossing oceans, not just for sitting in a marina looking pretty. For 40 years, I had kept a picture of a boat just like this pinned to the corkboard in my office. I used to look at it while I was on conference calls, dreaming of the day I would retire and sail around the world with my family. I had delayed that dream for decades. I told myself I had to work one more year to pay for Tyler's tuition. I had to secure one more contract to buy Patricia her summer home. I had sacrificed my own joy to build a kingdom for people who wanted to bury me in it. But standing there now, with the engine humming a deep, steady rhythm beneath my feet, I realized that the delay was over. The lines were cast off. The shore was drifting away, becoming a thin gray line on the horizon. I watched the city skyline shrink, the skyscrapers I had designed, looking like children's toys in the distance. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't the tightness of anxiety or the heaviness of grief. It was expansion. The wind whipped across the bow, tangling my silver hair and stinging my cheeks with salt spray. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, sharp air of the open Atlantic. I looked down at my hands gripping the railing. They looked strong. The tremors that had plagued me during the poisoning were gone. The stoop in my shoulders from carrying the weight of betrayal had straightened. I turned my face toward the sun. It felt warm and honest, unlike the cold, artificial light of the interrogation room. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the waves crashing against the hull. I was 70 years old, but I did not feel like an old man waiting to die. I felt like a young man who had just been given his first taste of freedom. I walked to the helm and looked at the digital charts glowing on the screen. The entire world was open to me. I could go to the Mediterranean. I could cross the Pacific. I could go to Antarctica if I wanted to. There was no one to ask for permission. There was no one to poison my drink. There was no one waiting for me to fail. I engaged the throttle, feeling the power of the vessel surge forward. I was not running away from my past. I had already defeated my past. I was running toward a future that finally belonged to me. I was Richard Caldwell, the architect. But I was no longer building houses for others. I was building a new life for myself, one nautical mile at a time. The horizon was empty and beautiful, and for the first time in my life, I was the captain of my own soul. The golden band on my left ring finger felt heavier than the anchor chain of the yacht. For 40 years, I had worn this piece of metal as a badge of honor. I had looked at it and seen loyalty, commitment, and a promise that stretched into eternity. Now, as I stood alone on the stern of the boat, watching the white wake churn into the deep blue of the Atlantic, I looked at the ring and saw only a shackle. It was not a symbol of love. It was a receipt for a transaction I had been losing for decades. It was a circle of lies that had been wrapped around my finger, cutting off the circulation to my common sense. I twisted the ring. It resisted at first, as if it had fused to my skin, a parasite refusing to let go of its host. But with a sharp tug, I slid it over my knuckle. The skin underneath was pale and indented a ghost of the constraint that had been there. I held the ring up to the sunlight. I read the inscription on the inside, worn down by time but still legible. Yours forever. I laughed. A dry, short sound that was lost to the wind. Forever lasted exactly until the bank account looked vulnerable. Forever ended the moment the arsenic touched the milk. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger is a hot emotion, and I was filled with a cool, refreshing clarity. I pulled my arm back and threw the ring. It caught the light one last time, a glittering spark of gold spinning through the air before it hit the water. There was no dramatic splash. It was just swallowed by the ocean, sinking down to the dark, crushing depths where it belonged. It would rest there in the silence, buried in the sand, just another piece of debris on the bottom of the world. People have always said that blood is thicker than water. It is an old proverb meant to guilt you into loyalty, meant to make you tolerate the intolerable just because you share a genetic code. But standing here alive and free, I have learned a different truth. Sometimes blood is not a bond. Sometimes blood is a toxin. Sometimes the people who share your name are the ones sharpening the knife while they hug you. The water that surrounds me now, this vast, indifferent ocean, is safer than the blood that ran through the veins of my brother or the woman I called my wife. I thought about the cost of this lesson, the legal fees, the lost real estate, the liquidation of assets. The total bill came out to roughly $25 million. To most men, that is a fortune. To most men, that is a tragedy. But as I leaned against the railing and felt the salt spray on my face, I realized the truth. I did not lose $25 million. I paid $25 million. It was the tuition fee for the most important education of my life. I paid that money to see the truth. I paid it to remove the masks from the monsters sleeping in my house. I paid it to find out that a stranger named Maria had more honor in her little finger than my entire family had in their whole bodies. I paid it to buy my life back. And looking at the horizon with the sun warming my face and the future wide open before me, I know one thing for sure. It was a bargain. I would have paid double. The wind picked up, filling the sails above me with a snap. I turned the wheel, steering the ship toward the unknown. A smile spread across my face. It was not the polite smile of a society husband. It was the wild, arrogant smile of a survivor who had walked through fire and come out holding the torch. The screen of my old life faded to black, but my new life was just beginning to rise with the sun. The story of Richard Caldwell stands as a brutal reminder that the most dangerous enemies often sleep under our own roof. We grow up believing that blood is thicker than water, but loyalty is the only currency that truly matters in this life. Blind trust is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability that predators will exploit. You must be willing to burn down the bridges that lead to toxic people, even if you spent a lifetime building them. Your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Protect your peace, guard your empire, and remember that sometimes losing everyone is the only way to find yourself. If you enjoyed watching justice be served and want more stories about resilience and revenge, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. What would you have done if you were in Richard's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.